Okay, we are on with Phil Allen and Isabel Murray, both of whom have been on this podcast before. And today we will talk about some things. And well, I can't promise yet whether or not it will just be Afghanistan, but let's say it will be Afghanistan to begin with. So let's start with Phil. Phil, you are quite an expert on economic affairs and how things that seemingly do not have much to do with economics can affect economic affairs and the overall, let's say, standing of a country and how the country sees its prospects in the near future. So looking at Afghanistan right now, so looking at the sort of spectacular speed with which the Taliban ran through all of the major cities, wooed so many governors of so many provinces into dropping their arms and handing them keys to the respective cities. Looking at all that, what do you think could be the obvious economic consequence for the world and for the region?
Well, I think we have to divide it between shorter term and more long-term consequences. So in the short term, I think the biggest effect will be seen on Afghanistan's trading partners, and maybe lucky for them, they haven't been they haven't been a very large economy. GDP per capita, even on a purchasing power parity basis, is around I think 2,500 USD. So it's a very poor country. But at the same time, they do run a really large trade deficit, something around a third of their GDP, and that's mostly covered by grants and aid. And a lot of these imports, well, some of them are coming from China, a good chunk of them. I think they're the largest trade partner right now. So I don't think China will feel much of a pinch, but Iran for energy might feel a little bit, and the other country, their neighbors in Pakistan and Tajikistan as well. So I think in the short term, there might be a little bit of a hit to the neighboring countries, but these are generally, other than Tajikistan, these are generally larger economies that might not feel too much of a direct impact from the what will be an abrupt drop in trade.
You said that, but Pakistan itself is on an IMF program, and it has been so since 2020 or 2019. There was a huge loan that the IMF sanctioned for them. Iran, it has been reeling under economic sanctions for quite some time. Of course, those sanctions were partly lifted a few years back once they signed the JCPOA, what's the colloquial term for it? The Iran nuclear deal in 2015, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA.
Right.
Some sanctions were lifted, but then once Trump's America pulled out of the JCPOA and Iran started making noises about enriching uranium and all that nonsense, sanctions are slowly coming back. So the point that you make about the economy surrounding Afghanistan not being in a position where they can be hit badly by this, maybe you're correct in the literal sense, but I don't think countries like Pakistan or Iran are in a good shape economically right now.
That's definitely the case. And for example, I mean, Iran has seen a dramatic drop in the value of its currency, the Iranian rial, since the sanctions were put back in place. I just don't know if the effects of the Taliban taking over and the consequent effects of that, for example, not being able to cover its large trade deficit, will be the major factor in kind of changing the economic playing field per se. I think that would be more related to the oil price, despite their ability to export oil being completely hampered now.
Not that much out.
Sorry? No, I'm talking about Iran.
Iran, sorry, not Afghanistan.
No, on Afghanistan, I mean, maybe, like I say, maybe kind of luckily for its neighbors, the Afghan economy was never particularly large. But of course, stability is certainly a factor, especially with cross-border trade with Pakistan. But I think actually what we will see though is something in the longer term, where there the amount of minerals in Afghan land. I mean, it's a very
Lithium.
rich land in terms of mineral, and I think we might see them in a desperate and precarious economic situation to the point where they might invite foreign investment from countries such as China, Turkey, and Russia to exploit those mineral resources, whereas maybe before the American-led government might have been more reluctant to allow this to happen. Now, under a Taliban regime, I think we might start to see some activity there. So that can be interesting, and um, the consequences for stability as well. Well, it's anybody's guess, actually, but for sure, there's going to be some foreign interest in keeping Afghanistan somewhat stable under the Taliban, at least enough to extract these resources.
Yeah, that's a very insightful answer, as your answers always are. Isabel, let me come to you to discuss the political side of this takeover. What seems to you to be the most remarkable aspect of this whole episode? To me, it seems to me that the way the Taliban took over all these cities, I mean, it smells of foul play. Like surely, I mean, I have heard some theories, some of them even sound like conspiracy theories, which said that although the Afghan military was on paper very well funded, thanks to American aid, and very well equipped, again, thanks to American weapons, uh, once the contractors left, the people on the ground who were still there didn't even have the technical know-how of operating all this heavy machinery. And that was one of the reasons why once the Taliban people offered them amnesty, like don't fight, we will not kill your people, we will not like behead your families, behead you in front of your families. They just said, okay, fine, here's the key to the city. I mean, what do you think went on there, politically speaking?
I think the biggest factor for me is that it was such a surprise. I don't think it was a surprise at all. I think that it's, like it or not, it's their country more than any other governing party's country. The Taliban had control of Afghanistan in the 1990s, and then the US invaded. They pushed the Taliban out of power and tried to create a governing body in Afghanistan, separate from the Taliban. But they never disbanded the Taliban. The Taliban was always there. I mean, in other countries like in the UK and the US, do we have a government and another politically powerful body that treats with other countries? I mean, just by making a deal, they didn't disband the Taliban, and they made deals with the Taliban, and they treated the Taliban as important and as powerful within the country as the proper political regime, the regime that they recognize internationally. But Donald Trump made the deal with the Taliban in 2020. In February 2020, he made the deal saying that we will leave the country within 14 months. We will withdraw all US forces, and we will not fight. I think he made the deal as well, saying that we agree not to fight against the Taliban. And the Taliban side of this was that they would not harbor Al-Qaeda, which is what the US initially went in for, was because the Taliban was harboring Al-Qaeda after 9/11. And so if the US government is making deals with this group of people, that completely legitimizes them. And we have this Afghani government that has only been in place for 20 years on fairly shaky ground. They don't have a strong claim to the country. They don't have a strong foothold there. The only thing keeping them there was the US military. Then the US military leaves. I mean, at what point are we going to stop calling them the Taliban and just call them the Afghani government? It's not that surprising that this happened.
Do we have the details of what the agreement between the Trump administration and the Taliban entailed? Like, or is it still classified?
I believe the broad strokes of it were we will pull out the US forces within 14 months. The deal was made in February 2020. So it said we will pull out the US forces within 14 months. We will not fight against the Taliban, conditions being you also don't fight against us, and that you no longer harbor Al Qaeda.
No, well, I mean, the reason I ask you that is because, well, I don't know what the deal said, but I have read what you're saying, exactly that. And also have seen some commentators point out, well, maybe speculate, that the deal said that the US wanted to withdraw within 14 months. And it was only Biden who said, no, 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 we are actually going to withdraw in 14 months. Because as we all remember, like this war has been in its ending phase since, I don't know, 2014, was it? Like Obama, I mean, it was President Obama. Obama was the first American president who first started making noises about like a complete withdrawal being an actual possibility. And same with, well, I don't think he said the same things about Iraq, but so the thing is, well, let's say what we are reading about what that deal contained is true. In the same vein comes the question of corruption within the Afghan, let's say, polity, within the Afghan political system. So if we make the assumption, if we accept that over the last 2 decades almost, the Afghan government that had been sort of put in place by the US, by the what was it, by the NATO, let's say. If we accept the argument, if we accept the claim that that government had been in receipt of like billions of American dollars in aid, lots of weapons and all that, can there be an argument to be made that since Afghanistan has always ranked fairly low, has been fairly low on the transparency index, what's that thing called again? The corruption index, like the looking at which people say the countries that come at the bottom are the most corrupt countries, politically speaking. And since Afghanistan has been quite low on that list almost always, is there an argument that one can make that because of that, the money that was coming in from the West, from America, was always going to not be used properly or transparently?
Yeah, I think so, of course.
So as a corollary, one could say that, so like no matter when the withdrawal was going to happen, once the withdrawal was done, the country would just descend into chaos. Well, descend into chaos.
I mean, if we take it to a very simplistic, some very simplistic key points, Taliban was in control of the country. America invaded the country. They ousted the Taliban. They tried to put another government in place. They never disbanded the Taliban. They never completely eradicated this enemy that they initially went in to fight against. And then they made deals with them. They acknowledged them. They legitimized them on the world stage, within the country. You know, the Taliban, who in the country has more political capital? If you're on the ground in that country and the Taliban is the one making the deal with the US.
Right.
And then so they went in and they sort of, it was half measures. And so they left, and it's going to go back to the status quo. They never completed the goal. They never fully got there.
Yeah. And also one could, and let me come to Phil here, one could point out that, as Isabel correctly said, the Taliban were ousted, literally. They weren't disbanded. They weren't like wiped off the map. And a lot of their commanders, a lot of the sort of ruling elite within the Taliban took shelter in neighboring countries like Pakistan, which were, at least on paper, allies of the US. And I can't remember the name of this guy. There was like a very, well, high up commander within the Taliban who was in Pakistani jail for quite some time, but it was just jail in name only, like they were just sheltering him. And of course, he knew that as long as he was in Pakistan, he was safe because the US couldn't get him out of there. So what do you think the US could have done differently with regards to their dealings with the Taliban in the early 2000s? I mean, if you are, say, bombing a country and there is a country right next to it, which is your ally, and the people you're bombing take shelter there, what do you do? Do you bomb your friend as well?
I mean, I think the thing is, I think Isabel had a good point in that it kind of amounts to that the Taliban might be the most legitimate government that
Yeah.
Afghanistan has had, because I mean, before that there were a series of puppet governments, including the People's
Majority.
Republic of Afghanistan under the Soviets as well, and I mean, basically it's been very difficult. I mean, they call it the graveyard of empires or something like that.
Sure,
Where,
they do, yeah.
I mean, most countries have had a huge struggle to have a grip on Afghanistan. Maybe they could control a few key cities, but that's about it. The Taliban seem to be the only ones who can actually claim legitimacy, because they can, not only could they control the country from what was it, the
96, 6 or 7.
96, yeah,
Yeah.
so like a good they had a five year run of keeping their hands on the over the whole country, and then another 20 years of lurking in the shadows and immediately able to pounce on a withdrawal. I mean, uh, for all their flaws, they're effective in actually controlling the territory, which is a lot more than any of the major powers can say. So, what could the U.S. have done differently? I don't know if they could have done a whole lot. I mean, I think they did way too much. Quite frankly, I don't think it's a battle that they could win. Um, Sometimes you have to you can't make the assumption that you can win every war and every battle. Yeah, it's unfortunate that it was being that some agents from Al Qaeda might have been harbored by a U.S. ally, but um, this is rough territory, and I don't think that Western powers or even the Eastern powers have any control over that.
Or even the Central Asian powers, or any power, basically.
Exactly,
Yeah.
exactly. So I mean, I don't know if there's anything anyone could have done differently,
Mhm.
yeah, or at least not much.
But
I
then,
think that if the US government and US military were to be totally honest, they would say that they knew that this would happen. I
yeah,
think the people on the ground in Afghanistan who really had a feel of the place knew that this would happen when they pulled out. But I think that the alternative was that they stay there indefinitely. Because if you have what is essentially a puppet government, like you said, instated by the US, driving all of its power from the US and from the US military, what's going to happen when the US military pulls out? Of course, it's going to
well,
collapse. Of course, they're
well,
going to.
it was on paper, it was supposed to be a democracy. Like there was supposed to be elections. So if you're unhappy with the party, you can vote them out. I mean,
Right, but I
theoretically,
mean,
that was.
even the concept of the democracy was instated there by the US. You know,
Yes,
it was all their plan, all their idea, and all of their power, all their authority derived entirely from the US forces.
that's right. That's right.
So, I
Um,
mean, I think that the Taliban, like it or not, you can definitely make the argument that the Taliban is the most legitimate government that Afghanistan has. I don't I don't want it to come across as I'm saying that they are acceptable government. What they
sure.
are doing to women, the religious persecution, how treatment of homosexuals, things like this is totally violating human rights. And I
Mhm.
think that, if we want to simply support stability in Afghanistan and in the region, then the fastest way to do that, the easiest way to do that would be to support the Taliban in their control of Afghanistan. But that comes at the cost of human lives, of human rights, and ultimately that's going to destabilize our unions. So the European Union, we see here destabilizing the European Union when we have Hungary. with openly homophobic policies, and a part of the European Union, and the European Union not stepping in to stop it. That destabilizes the union, because people, what's the point of the union if we have a country within the union doing this? And it's going to be the same in Afghanistan. If the UN supports Afghanistan, there's going to be other countries who just see that this is they're going to see this as unacceptable, and it's going to undermine confidence, and it's going to, what's the point in this? What's the point in this union?
Speaking of the European Union, and I'm glad you brought up the EU. I was reading yesterday that fearing an influx of refugees, Greece has started spending lots of money on erecting walls along its Turkish border. Was it the Turkish border? I believe the Turkish border. As we all know, like, Greece doesn't really have that much money. And, and still they are thinking, like, even if we are like broke, like no matter how skint we are going to spend money on like making sure we don't have a repeat of 2015. So just speaking of refugees for now, do you think we are looking at a repeat of 2015 with Afghanistan being the point of focus now instead of Syria? Or do you think it could be handled slightly differently? Because with 2015, one of the major issues was, if you look at the countries near Syria, only maybe Turkey showed any interest in accepting like a non-trivial number of Syrian refugees. Like Qatar didn't, the UAE did it, Saudi Arabia didn't, lots of other countries did it. Whereas with the case of Afghanistan, for years, countries like Iran and Pakistan have accepted like huge numbers of refugees from Afghanistan. So do you think we are looking at, just speaking on the refugee front now, do you think we're looking at a repeat of 2015? I mean, let's start with like Isabel and Phil. Yeah.
No, I don't think so, because I think that what happened in 2015 was we had certain countries being very overwhelmed because of their geography. So there was no there wasn't a very robust organized attempt to get refugees out and settled. They were a lot of the time making their own way and forcing the issue themselves, I think. So more like showing up and forcing the EU to make decisions and take action. And we had all the refugees coming over on boats or rafts. I mean, even to call them boats would be exaggerating.
Dinghies.
And in this case, we have a lot of the refugees are people who are helping the US. So a lot of these, this is what we're hearing about, is the translators, the doctors, medics, people who are helping the US forces. And so I think that there's an organized attempt to get them out. And I think that they will go to the US, and they will be, it won't be a case of overwhelming a seaside village with or a border village with refugees. So I think in that sense it will be different. I don't think we'll have a repeat.
And at least for now, thankfully, the airport in Kabul is not controlled by the Taliban. So airlifting people out of Kabul is technically still something that's possible.
Yeah, but then I think once we get all of the initial people out, the people at the airports, the people who are in immediate danger and are seeking asylum on that, so the known people, we're going to probably have a situation closer to North Korea than anything else. I don't think anyone's going to be allowed to leave.
Yeah. Phil, what are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I agree with Isabel on this. Also, I mean, the geography is quite different from from the Syria situation. I think it would be just geographically much more of a challenge to cross the Central Asia and Afghanistan as a start. Yeah, so I don't think so. Also, I think for migrants who do move that direction westward, I think that Turkey eventually can first of all, not only within their own borders, but Turkey still maintains a small presence in Afghanistan as well. And I think sometimes they like to use these small crises as leverage as well.
Sure.
but I don't think it will be a repeat of Syria. And like Isabel said, I don't know if people will be allowed to leave under a Taliban regime. It might be much more of a challenge.
Challenge. One thing that is related to this people not being allowed to leave and the North Korea comparison that Isabel hinted at is the economic side again. So as we were discussing this before we started recording, that the SDR assets, the special drawing rights assets that the IMF had promised Afghanistan, are now going to be frozen from Taliban access. Similarly, lots of assets held by the Central Bank of Afghanistan, which are positioned offshore, mainly in the US, are going to be, again, frozen from Taliban access. There are lots of other factors which seem to imply that that Afghanistan under Taliban rule will be a very impoverished, will be a very poor country, very poor country. By the way, Phil, you said earlier that Afghanistan's GDP per capita was 2,500 USD. I just checked, it's 500, or did you say under PPP?
In PPP, in purchasing power parity, yeah, it's about 2,500, I believe. Yeah, and in USD terms, sure, it's gonna be
500.
Less. Yeah,
yeah.
It's one of the poorest countries in the world.
Of course, yeah. So what I was going to say was, if you look at North Korea, the more economically isolated it became, the more, let's say, authoritarian it became towards its own people, because the ruling elite, the ruling dictatorship wanted to show to its own citizens that, well, see, we are actually very strong. It's not just, I mean, it's the conspiracy on part of, it's a matter of conspiracy on part of the West, on part of the US, that they don't recognize us or they don't give us money. And even there were, like with North Korea, there were stories like the aid that used to be given to them. This is like from mid 2007, 2008, when, I mean, the dictatorship is to spin the aid giving episodes as saying, well, see, they love our dear leader so much that they are sending gifts. So I'm saying, do you accept that there is like an axiomatic connection between economic hardship and an authoritarian government visiting like stricter and harsher realities on its own people?
I don't think so. I think that this is a difference in ideology and a difference in history. So I mean, I believe that the Taliban genuinely believes what they're preaching, which is this very harsh implementation of Islam.
Yeah. So even if they were rich, they would be, yeah, they would do all this. Okay.
Yeah, that's my personal belief based on what we've seen, empirically from how they ruled in the past. If they were just trying to create an image, then I mean, to me, it doesn't look like they care about their image at all. I mean, their image in the world is certainly not one of strength, power, prestige, human rights, or anything that's looked positively on by the rest of the world. I don't think they do it out of defiance. I think they do it out of a belief, and I think that stems more from a lack of education than anything else, and just a really dogmatic belief in their particular brand of religion. I think in the North Korea situation, it's a little bit different. You know, they had a this
war.
They had a war from 50 to 53. It's kind of frozen in time. It's still in a ceasefire. They're still keeping up the legends and the tales and the war heroes, and Kim Il Sung as the liberator of the country. It's just a different reason behind it, but the ultimate result is similar, sadly. I don't think it's related to that. I think it's just being dogmatic.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, with North Korea, I think that the ultimate motive there is power, and keeping power and trying to increase their power in the world, especially the dictatorships, the family's power. Yeah. And then in Afghanistan with the Taliban, if they don't genuinely believe what they are what they say they believe, if it is not just about the Sunni Islamic doctrine, I don't see what their motive could be.
Mhm.
I don't see any benefit for them. I don't see an end goal.
Right.
It doesn't seem like they're using this religious belief to another end goal. It seems like you said, that they really do just believe in what they're preaching. And if there is some other motive there, I can't figure it out. And the difference is that with North Korea, we can kind of work with that. If we understand what they want, we can sort of work with it. But what on earth are we supposed to do with a country that says we believe women should not be seen outside the house, and that's what God tells us, and we won't move on this?
Yeah, and also when it comes to, again, so like we are zigzagging a little bit. If we go back to the economics front, what do you think will happen to things like the TAPI pipeline, the Turkmenistan, Afghanistan, Pakistan, India gas pipeline, and other such projects which had been greenlighted, I don't know, in the 2010s or in the 2010s. I say this because when, for example, the Islamic Revolution happened in Iran in 1979, one of the first things that the Khomeini regime did after coming into power was they cancelled like a whole bunch of military contracts, security contracts that the Shah regime had signed with the US, and that caused a lot of upset. Do you think any such act of, do you think such acts of mass cancellation of contracts are upcoming, or do you think even if they are upcoming, they won't be considered that surprising or like remarkable?
I think that they will be canceled, but not by the Taliban.
Yeah.
I just don't think that
Okay, I see. Of course, yeah, because of the,
I,
yeah.
I mean, in the case of Iran, Iran would have held in '79 more of the cards on their side. For example, they were even back then a fairly newly industrialized
Mm-hmm.
nation, and they were, a nation state, a former kingdom for thousands of years, and there was some hope for stability under whatever
Sure.
regime they might have.
Yeah, they had been stable, like unlike Afghanistan, they had been stable like thousands of times under thousands of various kingdoms. Yeah, going back to
Exactly.
the dawn of civilization.
Exactly. I mean,
Yeah.
Iran, you could say, is probably one of the countries you would most assume in the world would hold together,
Okay.
regardless of the regime. Afghanistan, it's a completely different situation, and I don't think any investors will be able to, stay hold with their contracts in the country. I don't think the investment environment there will be conducive to any major investments, whether it be pipelines or anything else, or power plants or whatever. And unless,
Regardless.
yeah.
No, sorry,
Okay.
finish.
But I do think eventually for other foreign powers will fill the void of the U.S., create just enough stability to extract resources, and maybe you might see a return of this type of infrastructure project. But that might be a few years off.
Yeah, Priscilla?
So I think that regardless of the political landscape in Afghanistan, I'm not sure that the type of what they have to offer is going to be attractive investments in the future. I don't know if building gas pipelines and these kinds of things are going to be attractive investments given the environment, the environment and the environmental issues that we're facing. I think that we've had some pretty damning reports recently giving us only a few more years. And I think that any investor is going to have to weigh the risks of severe sanctions on oil and gas and fossil fuels from governments in the future, in the very near future. So I wonder if what they, before the region has had oil and gas, and this is their bread and butter, really. And On the one hand, if people can make money off of it, they will. But maybe we will. I hope we will finally reach that really critical point where we just can't ignore the environmental impact anymore, and we come down on the side of the environment over money.
Yeah.
Even if it's just a case of realizing that you can't make money if you're dead. And then once they lose that, I don't know what will happen.
Also, staying on this point of like trade contracts and it's linked to possible future invasions or possible future interferences. We can, of course, very easily think of examples like what happened in Iran with the coup of 53 or 54 when the Mossadegh government was overturned due to that Aramco dispute. And then there was United Fruit in, is it Guatemala? United Fruit, Guatemala, and there were like lots.
Guatemala,
someplace like that, and that's where the that's the birthplace of the term the Banana Republic.
Right.
Yeah. So what I'm saying is, in the second half of the 20th century, it was quite commonplace for foreign governments to, well, mostly the U.S. government, to come in, major interfering role in some cases, like as a strict, what should I say? Like strictly as an invader, if free market, free trade, let's say, sentiments are not being honored. With Afghanistan, I can see in a very direct way as to why that can't be possible right now, because of course it is the US who pulled out of their own volition in a way. So what do you think the future holds in terms of how investors or, like people who want to make money of the situation based in the US and some other places think of this? With the Iran case in 79, even today, you see people who, like there are many Iranians actually living outside of Iran who yearn for a day when the Shah will come back, or when someone related to the Shah will come back, and they will be able to go back to their countries, and it will be like it will be heaven on earth for them or whatever. And there are still many, like John Bolton, the erstwhile, what was he? Was he the National Security Advisor? He was, or the Secretary of something, I keep forgetting. He used to be a very major hawk on Iran in the 80s, like ever since the hostage crisis happened. So do you think that sort of behavior will just not be present on the American right or in the American political scene because of the very immediate realities surrounding like US withdrawal?
For me or for Isabel?
For you? I mean, I can,
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think there's less of an appetite in the U.S. now for foreign intervention. I think the U.S. population has grown tired of. I mean, I think part of the reason for the 2016 election of Trump was this more inward-looking view coming out of the U.S. I think the appetite for foreign wars has lessened. And I think those losses on the U.S. side, well, they're not really losses, but the kind of economic assets will just accrue with the rising Eastern powers for now instead. There seems to be more
Japan, China, Thailand, like that.
Yeah, I mean, there just seems to be more of an appetite for foreign intervention by the Chinese, by the Russians, and by the Turkish. And I think they might end up dealing with the same problems that the U.S. had, but for now, I think they might have a crack at it and be more trigger happy when it comes to making a decision to intervene and to stabilize a particular region for their firms, either private or public, to collect some of these assets, especially mineral resources and oil and gas resources. So I think the days of the U.S. Intervening so actively and so directly in foreign countries' politics is gonna wane, at least for a while, and at least until the consequences of these other countries' actions become more clear. And meanwhile, they're going to give it a go. That's my opinion.
Okay.
Yeah, I think if there's no threat to America, they're not going to intervene. I don't think Afghanistan poses a threat. There's no benefit to going in again. Although, you know, if you have the Taliban having a very strong foothold, and you know, I mean, the initial reason for the intervention was 9/11. And yeah, I think it could go back to, we could just come full circle and it will go back to that kind of terrorism again. But I think it's a little bit unlikely. I think that the most likely outcome is that intervention by a neighbor. I don't know which neighbor would be best placed, but one of the neighboring countries with a real threat from Afghanistan controlled by the Taliban. I think the most either we will just have another North Korea and it will be completely closed off, and it's very with a very strict religious rule that can't coexist in the modern world. You know, they can't take part in the modern world with these doctrines that they follow. So we'll either see a completely closed off country, or I think the alternative is that, as I said, a neighboring country will become threatened enough to invade and take over Afghanistan, and then there will be no more Afghanistan. It will be integrated.
Yeah. Okay. But one country that I can see as like a candidate in that regard is Pakistan, because Pakistan has suffered a lot in the hands of a particular terror group called the TTP. It's called Tehrik Taliban Pakistan. It's like an offshoot of the Taliban. And well, I mean, if we are to differentiate between the old Taliban and what is there now. So it is said, and I have been reading a lot of like news outlets coming out of Pakistan on this. It's being said there that the Pakistani government, especially the Pakistani military administration, the intelligence agencies, and like organizations like that, will try to tell the Taliban regime in Afghanistan now that, look, we have funded you all these years, we have given you money, we have given you shelter when you were thrown out of Afghanistan. So kindly ask your TTP brothers to not cause havoc in our country. But whether or not that will happen, we don't know. And people are also saying in these same news outlets that although the Taliban received training, received help from the Pakistani military, let's say, administration over these years, now that they are in power, now that they're strong, or at least on paper, they might just forget about all that. They might just refuse to toe the Pakistani line on matters such as what they should do to the Tehrik Taliban Pakistan. Yeah, so that would be something that we will have to see. One thing that we can also discuss here slightly, is the apparent mismatch between what happened to Afghanistan post the American invasion and what happened to Iraq post the American invasion. Iraq also became a hotbed of terrorism, especially since the birth of ISIS, let's say. But the Iraqi army kept giving them a good fight. Like the Iraqi army didn't disintegrate, didn't just drop down the way the Afghan army did. Why do we think that happened? Like, could there be like a I don't know, like an easy explanation for it? Like the Iraqi army did get a lot of funding from the US, did get a lot of training from the US, but still, when it came, when it was required of them to fight the ISIS, they did their best, and in lots of cases they did succeed. They didn't let the whole of Iraq to fall under ISIS control. But whereas if you look at what happened in Afghanistan, that's not the case with the Taliban. So what was the difference here between Iraq and Afghanistan? Like, we can maybe start with, again, to mention, none of us are experts on Afghanistan or on Iraq. I don't think any of us have ever been to Iraq or Afghanistan or Iran. Have you? Okay, no, yeah. So Isabel almost went to Turkey once, but that's not even.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
And Corona.
Sorry. Yeah, Phil. The Iraq Afghanistan comparison. What do you think?
Sure. I think ultimately it comes to a matter of kind of carrot and stick. in that, you know, on the carrot side would be receiving your salary as a member of the armed forces, and the stick would be the threat of losing. And I think that I suppose due to the deeply embedded corruption in Afghanistan, uh, salaries were not being received. At least that was the rumor floating around. And that was the carrot kind of lost, and the stick being threats from the Taliban. I mean, that combined, it makes for an easy choice to lay down your arms. And Iraq, as corrupt as it was, I guess it was a little bit better administered. And so, I mean, that would be I mean, it's all about incentives, right? Um, I don't think this is the case of Afghanis being diehard believers in the Taliban regime. I think it's more just a matter of monetary incentives and personal incentives. You know, how safe is my family if I'm battling a member of these forces? People are actively weighing their options, their costs, the pros and the cons, and I think the forces in Afghanistan ultimately made a choice, and it was an obvious one to them. In Iraq, I don't think we saw the same.
Yeah, Isabel, what do you think of this Iraq-Afghanistan comparison?
I think it's difficult to compare the two. I think that it does ultimately. I don't know about. I think it comes down a little bit to belief. I think that maybe if you don't believe in the religious teachings 100% of what the Taliban are saying, what they're saying that they believe in, you at least believe they believe it 100%, and that the consequences are going to be severe. I think it's much more stick than carrot in Afghanistan.
Sure, and yeah, sorry, go on.
Yeah, I think it's a lot of fear.
Yeah,
is how they. I mean, I think that the Taliban does seem to believe what they're doing 100%, and they will act completely mercilessly. I think people know that. I think that's why the Afghani government fell so quickly. And they all got out while they could.
Yeah, that was again very much like what had happened to the falling Shah when Iran fell, when Islamic Revolution happened in Iran in '79, and wasn't there a famous story of the last the last Muslim ruler of Spain weeping when I get this wrong every time. Was it Byzantium or once Spain was Moorish Spain for a while, and then once the Christians conquered it back, the way the last Muslim ruler of Spain, let's say for lack of a better term, left, there is a lot of literature on just that departure. Yeah. Anyway, so one thing that one can also mention here is that the Ba'ath regime in Iraq that the Americans sort of uprooted, and that was sort of, let's say, at the center of the invasion in 2003, had been in power since '69, continuously in power since '69. So if there was at all a degree of disenfranchisement against the Ba'ath regime, against the Ba'athist party in Iraq, it was, the possibility that that disenfranchisement was higher in magnitude compared to what was the case with the Afghans and the Taliban is very high, because of course the Taliban was in power in Afghanistan for a concrete 5-year period, and that 5-year period had been preceded by a period of civil strife, right? A period of civil rule, civil war, post the Soviet defeat. So maybe that is one of the reasons why the public are not entirely turned off by Afghanistan, turned off by the Taliban, because I have been reading a lot of reports about how the so-called Kabul elite do indeed hate the Taliban. If you go into some of the rural areas where there is not, when you don't have good internet, where you don't really live like one might, like live like in the 21st century, the love for Taliban, the love for a simpler life is quite like prominent, and that factored into how they reacted to the Taliban. But then again, maybe all of this is quite irrelevant because it's not like there was a referendum and the Taliban and the Taliban pulled off like a stunning victory or something. Yeah, okay. Okay, Phil, let me come to you on a slightly, to discuss a slightly different point. And this has to do with what happens to the ruling elite that leave a falling country. What do you think will happen to people like Ashraf Ghani or I believe, what's the guy's name? Amjad Ahmadi or some name like that? Ahmad Amjad, the governor of the governor of the Central Bank of Afghanistan, like lots of people who worked in the administration in Afghanistan that now doesn't exist, have left. What do you think will happen to them? Will they just keep lobbying because they have like contacts that were established during their time in government? Do you think they'll just keep lobbying foreign governments to come back, to re-intervene? I mean, what do you think they will do?
I don't think they have a chance really, and I think they know that. That's just my personal take. I could be wrong, but I think they're just gonna have to seek employment abroad, quite frankly.
Yeah,
But it
become a
yeah.
PhD student.
I mean, they'll definitely earn some good speaking fees in some forums, but it ultimately represents an outflow of talent as well, and
Yeah.
probably capital too, if they're getting a chance to take whatever they can with them. This is a typical case of the the talented, the elite, and the wealthy kind of taking everything they can with them and all their knowledge and their skills and leaving. I don't know what the official platform will be for the Taliban rule and who they plan to put in place, if they even plan to have a central bank. For example, they might plan to just dollarize the economy,
Yeah, I was reading about
50%.
this. I was reading about this. Is that mathematically possible?
Sorry, say that again.
Is that mathematically possible?
Yeah, I mean, a country can operate with a foreign currency as its official currency, or
Like
even
Zimbabwe? Like Zimbabwe did for a bit? Was it Zimbabwe or Venezuela?
Zimbabwe did. Also, some Latin American countries have done so. Ecuador,
Okay.
Panama, Kosovo in Europe as well just unilaterally adopted the euro. So they might even not have to do it officially. I mean, they might just Afghanistan could just abolish their central bank, and some other currency or currencies will fill the vacuum. The Taliban might not even see a need to recruit for that talent in their administration. Um, I mean, I don't know. I'm not really sure what the new Taliban economic platform is, other than that it will certainly be influenced by Sharia law and Islamic banking. But otherwise, yeah, that's all uncertain. I don't see these these people who expatriated from Afghanistan holding much sway, but they'll probably end up being consultants with U.S. agencies, and they'll probably be
Think tanks. Yeah.
think tanks, or they'll be debriefed by the CIA. But I don't think they'll
didn't you
get
didn't you
really
used to didn't you or don't you even now work at a think tank? How would you feel if you were replaced by a fleeing of
Well,
I'm just joking.
they've paid their dues more than I have, so I think they'll have earned the spot.
No, sure. I'm just joking. Yeah. You can't be replaced by, yeah, I don't think we'll be replaced by. Yeah, okay.
But yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I don't see them holding much influence over the new incoming Taliban government. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, Isabel, what do you think will happen to the politicians who fled Afghanistan?
The politicians who fled,
Yeah.
I think they'll be absolutely fine. I think they're
Right.
probably sitting pretty somewhere already.
So they won't be like killed in their sleep or something.
I think the Taliban is going to have
Possibly
enough
not.
problems
Yeah.
in Afghanistan. To be honest, I've never really thought of the Taliban in terms of their governing policies besides the obvious. But
Mhm.
I mean, yeah, it's a good point. They're a new government. They have a country to run now. They need to
Yeah.
think about things like import and export and
Tax regimes.
the economy. All the minutiae, their foreign policy, things like this.
Yeah.
So I wonder what's going to happen there. It'll be interesting to see. But as far as the fleeing politicians, I think they probably had more than enough money to
Mhm.
get away clean.
And to pay
And as
for
long
like
as
security guards and stuff.
yeah. So I'm sure they're fine.
Yeah.
I don't think the Taliban has the reach to do anything to them outside of Afghanistan.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Again,
it's not.
Phil, maybe that is a striking difference with Khomeini-led Iran in the 80s, where they had the reach and they were like threatening Salman Rushdie in the UK and killing his translators in, I don't know, Norway, Japan. Yeah. So.
Well, interestingly, something similar has been going on with Myanmar, Burma, right now, where there was some attempted assassination in the U.S. By the new ruling party, the new military ruling regime in Myanmar, which is kind of a surprise because it's also a desperately poor country, not in the same
Yeah.
dire straits as Afghanistan,
And
but not
and they
too
also
far.
have had their SDR assets frozen.
Right.
Yeah.
And they somehow managed to have the reach, but I think ultimately it's true they have other things to worry about,
Yeah.
and Afghanistan is not really comparable to anywhere else
Yeah,
in terms of.
Myanmar, like Aung Suu Kyi and Myanmar is such a love-hate story because like when she first came into power after like facing so much hardship, everyone loved her. And then once the Rohingya genocide started, people were like, yeah, like screw you, you are doing some really nasty things. You should be at The Hague. And then the military junta like deposed her. And then we are confused. Like, what should we do? Should we sympathize with her plight, or should we just say you deserve this? But then again, like this is
Well,
that is unfortunate.
sometimes there's just no good actors in
Exactly. Yeah.
politics.
One other thing. I will come to your startup in a minute. Before that, let's discuss one final point about the condition of women in Afghanistan. Of course, before the US invasion, it's not like things changed for the better overnight once the Americans entered Afghanistan. But pre-2001, things were pretty bleak. I mean, as we were talking earlier, as we were discussing earlier, like women couldn't leave the house without a male guardian. They couldn't go to school. I think they could strictly not go to school or something. Like, education was banned. It's not like they could go to school with a male. And then over time, maybe like as a consequence of some other factors, girls going to school, at least in Kabul, a big city, became a reality. Whereas now, I mean, we are staring at maybe a return to the dark ages. So what is the prognosis there? And also, is it at all true that the American presence in Afghanistan, I hope it is true, that the American presence in Afghanistan had a major role in ensuring that this progress was possible. Although, of course, if one is to now argue that that was the reason why the Americans went there, that would probably be a bit disingenuous. But then again, I'm loading the question unnecessarily now, but I can't help myself. But then again comes the point of neo-imperialism, neocolonialism, and the liberal backlash against it. So if we are to say that the Americans had no business being in Afghanistan, don't we concede as a corollary that if the Americans didn't go there, the condition of women in Afghanistan wouldn't have improved at all between, I don't know, 1997 and now, 1996 and now. So what is the line that we should walk on? What is the line that we should take there? And also, yeah, let's start with civil now. Like just on the condition of women in Afghanistan, what is the future for them?
They're fucked.
Yeah.
I mean, all of the women in Afghanistan who were able to go into education and get degrees and master's degrees, PhDs even, and start to get jobs, they need to throw it away.
One small thing.
The-
I'll just say, yeah, that the Taliban have been saying over the past few days that they will allow, quote unquote, allow their leaders to be interviewed by female journalists. They will allow female news anchors and things like that. Anyway. Yeah.
Okay. Wow. No, I mean, the women in Afghanistan are in a terrible position. And to be perfectly frank, I don't think anything's going to be done about it. I don't think we have I can't think of one instance that we have ever invaded or even imposed sanctions for women's rights.
Mm-hmm.
Do you think of any? I mean,
Well, I mean,
women in Eastern countries, in Muslim countries, in Saudi Arabia, places like this, I don't see any. I don't think there's a big
there
sanctions
can be
or anything.
things like, for example, if a country is trading a lot of human hair, and if like word gets out that the hair that they're selling is coming from women who are not exactly consenting to having their hair removed, like hair being sold to be used in wigs and stuff. If such a thing happens, I can see countries refusing to buy that hair. Okay, that's it. But
have they? I thought that they always buy the hair. It's not countries buying hair, it's companies buying the hair.
Exactly. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I don't think we've ever taken military or economic sanctions to defend women's rights.
Mm-hmm.
Not in modern history. Maybe I'm wrong, maybe I'm forgetting something. So unless there's a threat on home soil in one of the larger Western countries, or there's some economic threat or benefit for it, I don't think anything's going to happen. I think they can keep the women under lock and key, and no one's going to do anything about it.
Well, of course, when some invasions, there have been cases in the past, I think, well, let's say, I don't know, with Iraq, or even not with Iraq, well, let's say even with Afghanistan 2001, when the invasion had already been planned. No, I'm saying even when it had already been planned, there were people who had already been in favor of the invasion saying things like, well, they treat their women horribly. They are like a savage people, so we need to.
But they didn't give a fuck, really, did they?
Yeah.
I mean, maybe they'll use it to bolster their argument, but the treatment of women was ongoing for a very long time, and then they invaded because of 9/11. That was why they invaded.
Yeah,
maybe they bolster their reasons with women's rights, but it wasn't a conversation. It wasn't on the table before that.
But without foreign intervention, do you see a way in which the situation can be helped?
A coup, I guess. If I think that the only, obviously, just going in with the West going in with a heavy hand and trying to take everything in control, it's not going to work. It hasn't worked. So I think that the only possible solution would be, as I said, the neighbours invading, taking the country over, integrating it, splitting it up between them, and then there will be no more.
But the neighboring countries aren't exactly known for their excellent treatment of women.
So. Or the alternative is that there's a coup internally, hopefully supported by the West, to give support to people internally. But I don't know.
Phil, what are your thoughts on what are your thoughts on this women factor?
So I'll say first of all that the Western countries kind of make a very half-hearted attempt to give some image that they support certain types of free political regimes, and then sanction ones that don't follow that line, which is obviously not the case. But they tend to kind of give this image. But then you have countries such as China, that are willing to work with any regime that's in power, regardless of their human rights record. And so, whereas, for example, the US and its European allies might stop dealing with Afghanistan entirely, and yeah, they might use some language about human rights and women's rights to bolster their reasoning, but ultimately, it's like it would just be unpopular to trade with such a regime, and they'll just throw in um, some words, some cheap words to make it legitimate. But then you have countries like China and to some extent Russia and Turkey that may be willing to work with the Taliban and may be willing to prop them up. So I don't know if I mean the Taliban might actually have its hand strengthened after a couple years, and I don't see them fading until
Right.
the next more brutal political entity takes its place. But I do see an opportunity potentially for the country to split up because it's almost synthetic in terms of its borders, a lot like some of its neighbors. And but I still think it's unlikely. But I mean, there is a possibility of that, and that might be the only chance for its human rights records to improve.
I see what you mean. I see what you mean. In a way, again, to pull up an Iraqi example, the way Kurdistan exists within Iraq.
That's exactly what I was thinking. The Kurdistan example. So there might be some more liberal tribes or liberal regions or elements of Afghani society, and then there might be the more conservative ones. So I mean, there could be in the foreseeable future a situation where you have
in the foreseeable future. Sorry.
No, I'm just thinking that in the medium or long term, you might see a situation where there might be some breakaway regions of Afghanistan that do recognize and treat women as equals, but then others that will be more rigidly conservative,
following the Kurdish blueprint. Although, of course, the problem there is like the Kurdish people, especially the people residing in the north of Iraq, like those Kurds have for the longest time been like that, socially, culturally. Whereas the people residing within the present-day borders of Afghanistan, they don't have a history like that. So, I mean, although it would be optimal, it would be nice if women's rights were respected, if minorities were treated better, if like lots of things were done differently. They don't have that history. So even if the Taliban were not present, I don't think there are conducive factors which will lead them to that goal. I mean, they're not going to look at Iraq or look at Kurdistan and be like, okay, fine, let's be like them, or even Pakistan. And
ultimately, it's a tribal country rather than a nation state.
Yeah.
And so, there could be a situation where there ends up being like a patchwork of various autonomous or semi-autonomous regions with varying records on human rights, women's rights, and economic regimes, etc. But I mean, it could be like a Somaliland situation as well. I mean, it's really hard to tell.
But not Sudan, South Sudan.
Oh yeah, but not Sudan, South Sudan. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
But
but I mean, my initial reading of the situation was that it could be like Libya, like it could like staying within Africa, like it could be like a hotbed for terrorism. And already there were reports, again, mostly in the Pakistani media, saying that a lot of sort of wannabe terrorists who are currently based in places like Burkina Faso, Tunisia, Indonesia, like lots of those places, after the fall of Syria, after the fall of Raqqa, after the sort of disappearance of the ISIS, they could now look to Afghanistan and the Taliban as the next like pilgrimage. Like, let's just go there, let's just set up a base, and then we will do stuff. And apparently this was, and going back to what Isabel started, Isabel started with like some minutes, like about an hour ago. that apparently was one of the conditions that the US put to the Taliban in Doha, that you're not going to give shelter to these people. But the thing is, what did they say then? Like, if you do, we will do what? So that remains a mystery. Do you have anything to add? Or I really want to get to your startup on food.
No, I think that's it on my side. Isabel?
Okay. Isabel, do you want to say
Yeah.
something? Okay.
No,
Okay,
let's get
fine.
to the startup.
Yeah, Phil, it's all like the stage is all yours. Talk about food.
Yeah, I've been working on a project the last couple years actually, which is actually the reason I'm in Thailand in the first place. It was to
Right.
build a food platform to connect small food producers with restaurants and grocers. And well, that all got rudely interrupted by COVID, and so that's unfortunate. But now it looks like I have the chance potentially to really make some strides with this. And yeah, I see. We talked briefly before. I see it as as from somewhat of a political angle,
It's a libertarian
because
adventure.
yeah, because the focus is on small food producers who have difficulty because of the regulatory regime. And so in Thailand, that's not so much of an issue because most people are operating in a gray area, in the gray market, in the black market, where they sell their food products, which is why I think it's a great place to be based.
Wait. Even for food, there is a gray market and a black market.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, there's no, yeah. I mean, so for example, restaurants are all official. They're all officially registered businesses. They have they charge VAT. They pay their corporate income tax, etc. But then you have a whole class of food vendors who are just selling food on the streets, from from food carts and food stalls. But not only that, there's a lot of professionals, I mean, who work middle class or upper middle class office jobs, who sell food as a hobby. So even in your own apartment building, you might be
Right.
part of a group chat with all the other tenants, and people will can their own foods or jar their own foods and sell it in the chat. And then all these different applications and websites emerged, and Facebook groups as well for people to do that. I mean, it's a very lively market for illegal food, or under-regulated, unregulated food. And I think that exists very strongly here in this region, Southeast Asia, but particularly in Thailand. And but in other countries, small producers don't have such freedom. Um, yeah, we're not allowed to take the risk of having a bad stomach and being stuck on the toilet for a day in exchange for cheap street sausages or someone's homemade pickles or something like that. And although we have the freedom in some countries to buy cigarettes or to buy alcohol, but we can't risk our lives on cheese made with unpasteurized milk. So I would like not only to support the food producers by means of a platform, but also kind of give them a voice about the difficulties they face in producing and selling their products legally in countries where it might be more difficult to do so.
Yeah, Isabel, do you want to ask him something about this?
Well, I'm just interested in hearing an update on where you are with it. I mean, you said you were interrupted, so have you been able to make much progress? Because I already knew about this. I think this is the same one that you've been working on for quite some time, right? It hasn't really changed.
That's exactly right. And what happened was, the job I'm working in now, it was supposed to initially be. So I started this somewhat in a somewhat official capacity in October of 2019, and then in by January, I took this job that I'm at now that was supposed to be initially like a 6 to 8 month contract. And that was supposed to be replenishing my bank account that was depleted when paying for developers and these kinds of costs. And but then COVID happened, and it seemed like the right thing to do to stay on with the contract when it was offered to me. And so now what was supposed to be a 6 month gig or an 8 month gig has turned into over a year and a half. And so that has given me limited time to work on it. But originally the plan was to leave after the 6 month mark and to continue. But now I don't want to speak too soon, but I do have a potential deal going on. I'll find out the results of it in the next couple weeks, where I might be able to pursue this full time for a very long time. So yeah, I don't want to jinx it. So I'll let you know if I have any news. But
yeah, please. I'd love to. Okay, I can't really use your app if I'm not based in Thailand, right?
Well, it's not limited by country, but the thing is, regulators might not see too kindly to it in the European Union, or even more so in North America. At least in Europe, maybe it's a viable option in some countries in Eastern Europe or in Italy, maybe even Spain. But yeah, it's going to differ wildly from country to country in terms of how hard the regulators crack down on these things. But in Thailand, this is a thriving business, and I think it's a great place to be planted for that.
Well, okay.
So maybe here in Bulgaria, I'll be able to use it.
I really hope so, because Bulgaria was the place where I got the idea, and it was because of the problems that Bulgarian food producers were having. So that's an unfinished mission. At the time, I was volunteering with an organization called Slow Food International, which deals with these kinds of things, and so that's where the idea kind of started.
But is getting good food in Bulgaria quite a hassle? Okay, yeah, I don't know. Both of you have lived there, so.
I mean, depends what you're looking for. The selection is definitely limited, I can say, in the cities by the regulator there, because there are a lot of people who want to sell their homemade lutenitsa, but it hasn't been inspected to the. Well, maybe it has, but maybe a bigger competitor is paying off the regulator to keep the competition at bay. That's a little bit what I was hearing in Bulgaria's case.
Good old corruption. Okay, that's interesting. I have never thought about food in this way. Yeah.
There's a book that I came across recently about this topic. It's called "Everything I Want to Do Is Illegal," by Joel something. I forget his surname. But yeah, I just started reading.
Joel Salatin.
Yes, that's the guy. And I just started reading it, and I started listening to some of his lectures. But it's exactly about this topic, how the selection. You're sharing the screen. Yep, that's the one. About how the selection of food you see in the supermarket is kind of artificial. It's just an appearance, just to show. And if there was really a free market in food, you would see a lot more small producers and a lot less mass-produced corporate goods on the shelves.
Yeah, and it's very uniform in terms of. Well, I can give you a very bad example. I should have stopped recording by now, but I'll finish this sentence and we'll stop recording. So, like here in Germany, of course, Lidl is a German company, LIDL. I think you know about this. So you wouldn't believe it. Like if you enter a Lidl in Germany, when I enter my Lidl here, I don't really feel like I'm in a place that is different from the Lidl that I used to go to in Manchester. Like everything is so similar, except they sell a thing here called donut pizzas, which is quite special. Like donut pizzas don't exist in Manchester or anywhere. And I showed a picture of it to some Italian friends, and they were outraged, obviously. Anyway, donut pizzas, that could be a nice place for us to stop recording now. Stay on for a few more minutes. We can speak a little bit before we end the call. Thank you, both of you again. And I know it was a very strange message for you to get from me. Like, do you want to come and be on record talking about Afghanistan? Yeah, but yeah, thanks again for coming,
well,
both of you.
There goes our political careers, Phil.
To be honest, no. Last time I recorded my episode with Phil, Phil said, I think you asked me not to tag you, not to tag your Facebook. And Isabel, you're not on Facebook, so I'm not going to tag any of you anywhere else, unless someone Googles your name and comes to this interview on YouTube. That could, yeah. Well, okay. Thanks again, guys. Let me stop recording now.